Hey everybody, it's Tim Miller and Bill Crystal. We're back with Ballot Box with Bill and Tim. We're not live this week. We're taking 1 week off from live, but we're not leaving you hanging. Okay, we want to give you our naughty and nice list for 2023 and talk a little bit about the Iowa caucuses. We're only 2.5 weeks out from Iowa, and so we can't take a week off. And Bill famously isn't a big Christmas man.
Well, one's religion drives one in certain. What's great about America is we have freedom of religion, freedom of non-religion. We don't second guess other people's observation of Christmas or not. We don't make nasty comments about bizarro Santa Claus hats and stuff. We're very. It is
nice. Did you wish that anyone rotted in hell this Christmas?
That was
did you
great.
Send any Christmas greetings like that, Bill?
That was. I mean, I'm not Christian, so who am I to say? But I have the vague sense that that's not the spirit of Christmas, as Christians tend to understand it now, or even through the ages. That was a little. Trump he never fails to disappoint, and I don't know. Maybe he knows what he's doing, right? I mean, this is what kind of unnerves me about it. It's like can you believe you said this? And then of course we're going to look up next week, and it'll be plus 3 more points in the national GOP presidential primary. He'll be at 72 instead of 68 or something,
I don't know. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. Maybe I'm getting old. But I think that people, generally speaking, want traditional Christmas greetings. A happy holidays, a Merry Christmas, good tidings to all, that sort of thing. Not rot in hell, witch hunt. I'm hoping that does end up accruing to Donald Trump's disfavor when he has to appeal to normal people next fall. That unfortunately I don't think is going to be happening in 2.5 weeks in the Iowa caucus.
Like I say, my idea of doing something transgressive is to be go on and on about how Die Hard's a great Christmas movie, and and tweet about that and say it on conversations like this and get Sonny Bunch annoyed and relish.
I don't understand. I never did understand in that debate why Goodfellas. Why is Die Hard a Christmas movie but Goodfellas is not?
Well, I'm not sure. Someone I noticed says Goodfellas is actually. So yes, this anyway. That was sort of like you can't say Die Hard's a Christmas movie because they like. 27,000 people a lot of people get killed and blown up and so forth, and it ends with Hans Gruber falling off the tower and all. But I feel like that's so pathetically pale compared to what Trump just routinely does, right?
Well, our lunatic in chief, who is also alone this Christmas, which is in its own way kind of sad. There's some video that Ron Filipkowski, our friend, put up of him sitting alone at Mar-a-Lago at Christmas dinner among the Cougars. It's kind of a sad state of affairs, but he heads into the Iowa caucus. It's a place that, in theory, he lost in 2016. That in theory, might not have been good for him this cycle, right? I think that now everything looks as if it was inevitable for Donald Trump the whole time. But there were smart, reasonable people who thought maybe Iowa and New Hampshire might be a problem for him. The Iowa caucus goers traditionally are more, I think, traditional Christians, or at least they were at one point, that might not like Donald Trump's manifestation of Christianity. New Hampshire has has an open primary, more independents participate. Democrats can even cross over. And yet, here we are 2.5 weeks out, and he is clearly in pole position in Iowa, even much better than in New Hampshire. So what say you? Are you retaining any hope for the Nikki Haley surge, or what do you think the state of affairs are here 2 weeks out?
Yeah, it's right. Less than 3 weeks. It's kind of amazing, right? And then New Hampshire a week later. So I'm keeping hope alive, Tim. That's the kind of guy I am. You know what I mean? Me, Jesse Jackson. That's kind of where I come from politically. And so I don't know. I mean, if you wanted to be positive, Trump's at 60% now average in the national presidential primary polls.
Well, let me just run through that really quick. So we've got, in Iowa, the last Des Moines Register poll, which is the gold standard, had Trump 51, DeSantis 19, right. Haley 16. If you look at the average of all the Iowa polls, pretty close to that, really. So, Ann Seltzer was on basically what the average is. And then if you look at the national, you got Trump at 62 in the average, and DeSantis and Haley down at about 11.
So
okay, spin that for me.
So
William,
the more voters voters in Iowa and New Hampshire, where Trump's averaging maybe mid-40s, even so slightly below Iowa,
Yep.
They've seen more of Trump, and they've also seen much, much more of the other candidates. They have the sense that there's a race. I think most of the country, it's sort of Trump is the former president, and why shouldn't he be the nominee? And these others haven't shown up there much, obviously, except for Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, a little bit. So there's some evidence, if you want to be sort of optimistic, that as the race becomes more real, Trump's massive lead gets whittled down to just a commanding lead, 50 instead of 60, I guess. So if Trump ends up with 51, let's just say 50, if Haley can beat DeSantis, which now looks, I'd say, quite possible, don't you think? I mean, maybe 50-50. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I feel like she could. Maybe even by 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 points. So if she gets to the mid-20s, maybe. I don't know. It's a big victory for Trump. Could it be enough with Nikki in second to force DeSantis either out of the race or really suppress his vote? I think forced Christie kind of to get out, let all the non-Trump votes in New Hampshire, not all, but many of them come to Nikki. Some of the DeSantis votes go to Trump, I suppose. Could Nikki be then competitive in New Hampshire, where Trump's been more mid-low 40s, I think, in some of the polling? And Nikki's clearly moving up there. That I think is pretty true from the polls. She's probably already in the 20s. Could you imagine a Gary Hart, Mondale, 1984 type, or McCain Bush 2000 upset in New Hampshire?
All right, you were going 1984. I was trying to wonder what you were going to throw back to. I thought maybe Ed Muskie, but we're going to go for Gary Hart.
Some 19th century precedents. There aren't a lot of precedents of anyone losing the nomination when you're this far ahead as Trump. That is the truth, especially when, as our colleague Jonathan Last likes to point out, everyone knows him. So what new information are they going to get? That he's nasty on Christmas, and so presumably that 50% is reasonably solid. That 45% New Hampshire is reasonably solid. If you have 50 and 45 and then there's more than one opponent, you win, right? So, I mean, and if he wins both, I think it is probably over. So you need the scenario of Nikki's second in Iowa, and I would say with a little gap over DeSantis and not it'd be a big gap with Trump, but not a massive gap with Trump. Surging in New Hampshire, then in that week between the two, nipping Trump in New Hampshire. Then it's 5 weeks, 4.5 weeks till South Carolina, followed by Michigan. South Carolina and Michigan, I think, we went through this in 2020 together, Tim, I think are open primaries, both of them, actually. I think you just show up and sort of like Virginia, you just show up and vote whichever primary you want. New Hampshire, Democrats cannot vote in the Republican primary and vice versa, but independents, of which is about a third of New Hampshire, what are they called there? I can't remember, non-declared or something.
Undeclared, yeah.
Can vote in either primary. Iowa, which I sort of hadn't really focused on this until a few weeks ago. In Iowa, you can show the Republic. It's run by the party. It's a caucus. They're really a firehouse primary. You show up and you listen to a couple of speeches and cast your secret ballot. It's not like the Democrats where you huddle. It's public and you just go stand in a corner and all that. In Iowa, you can show up and request a Republican ballot. Say you're a Republican, re-register as a Republican, and they can't say no. I mean, if you say you're a Republican, right, you're a Republican. So actually, a fair number of independents or Democrats could show up in Iowa. They'd have to their neighbors would maybe slightly startled to see them there. On the other hand, they don't have to they cast a secret ballot and they can leave. It's not like they're, 3 hours of getting interrogated by all their people from their small town or from their neighborhood. Could some of them come out and help Nikki to get to a decent second, to help possibly stop Trump from being the Republican nominee? I don't think that's impossible. So that's the other slightly positive element, if you want to be sort of somewhat rose-colored glasses about the whole thing.
Yeah. So 2 thoughts on that. Just one, just going at the New Hampshire numbers, just looking at in the polling average, Trump's plus 20 in New Hampshire, which is significantly less than the national. You look though at his ballot number. Most recent poll: St. Anselm 44, UMass Lowell 52, CBS 44, CNN 42. Right. So maybe that's the most hopeful one. If his ballot number is in the mid 40s and Trump drops out, and DeSantis drops out, he's right there at 50. It's a little close to 50 for the fantasy to play out. And this is where I hate to throw cold water on this. I hate being a Trump humper on all this stuff, because I hope that I would love to be wrong and for magic to happen. And if there's any time for miracles, isn't it Christmas when I'm in a Santa hat? But I do want, just practically speaking, think that the problem with the Nikki crossover theory is twofold. One, if it was closer, if people felt like I can really make a difference here, you can see it, right? Like you can see more than I certainly can see some Never Trumpers going up for her. I can certainly see some really high info, Democratic voters going. But to get the kind of numbers that you would need to move 3-4%, you kind of need to be close enough for those people to feel like it's worth it, right? You also need to be palatable enough for those people to think it's worth it. And I think a lot of them look at Nikki and it's like, I go back to the Whit Ayers story, who you've done some great conversations with on the Crystal Conversations YouTube page that people should check out. And he's like, he was talking to a dentist or something is the story, and they wanted to stop Trump. And the husband's like, I'm more conservative, so I went for Marco. And the wife's like, I'm more liberal, so I went for Kasich. And Whit's like, you're canceling it out, And it's like, people aren't as astute, like your average person that wants to do this is not watching this YouTube, even though they should be. And so, some of those people might go for Christie, right? You know what I mean? Because he's more palatable, right? Unless he gets out. So I think that like Nikki kind of runs into that problem where I just don't. Maybe that story changes if she is 28 in Iowa and Trump's 41, and DeSantis is 8, right? I may be overstating it, but if she really overperforms and there's a big media push for her for a week and she's on all the shows and I could see maybe, but as it stands right now, I just think that a lot of the types of people she'd need to fill this strategic voting void are kind of like, I don't know. I don't know that she's close enough for me to vote for somebody that like hasn't exactly covered themselves in glory.
Yeah, I think that's more. I can see that happening in New Hampshire more easily if she gets close enough, decent enough second in Iowa. I think the harder thing is to get her to the decent second in Iowa in the first place, which is a caucus. It's really a firehouse primary, but it now the one thing she has going for her is there's no early voting at all in the caucus in Iowa. You show up and you vote 7 p.m. Monday, January 15th, I think it is, right?
Right.
So, if Seltzer's last, so the Des Moines Register, which is the one big paper in Iowa, usually will come out Saturday night, Sunday morning edition with its last poll. I hate to put any weight on that because, it's such an inside baseball thing in a certain way. But I actually do think in this case, if Trump has dropped a few points into what was he at 51 in Ann's last one? So 44, I don't know, it's not possible. And she's up at, 25 or something like that, and suddenly a lot of people see that. Could you get a much bigger turnout, a few percentage worth of independents coming to vote in the Republican, to caucus in the Republican caucuses? There's no Democratic race. There's literally nothing for them to do on that Monday night in Iowa except watch. I don't even know. There's not even Monday Night Football anymore, right? We're in the playoffs, so I don't know what they'll do. I guess there's probably some University of Iowa basketball games.
Yeah, we'll be in the playoffs. Yeah, Caitlin. Right. Caitlin, Iowa women's basketball.
Well, that's true.
Is taking the country by storm.
Insane high school basketball games. Well, whatever. But anyway, maybe that changes the dynamic. So I think it actually the next 2 weeks, the weeks before the caucus matter in terms of the sense of momentum. They matter in terms of the reality. She'll have plenty of money. She has the Koch organization, which has some ground game. I think that's been a little bit more evened out than one would have expected 2 months ago, when Trump was Colossus and Nikki was kind of scrambling along with Pence and Scott and DeSantis and Vivek. So there's a little movement in the direction of getting to 101. Now, even if you get to 101, even if she loses Iowa by 17 and wins New Hampshire by 5, which seems like a very, very, very almost best case, very good case, very, very, very good case. Then, of course, there's no reason to assume that Trump doesn't beat her in South Carolina, Florida, California, and everywhere else. Except that's where the one-on-one dynamic maybe changes things. I was talking to a friend in Iowa who said, we need everything to go right in Iowa and then New Hampshire, and we need Trump to totally lose it when Nikki beats him that Tuesday night in New Hampshire, and to have a Howard Dean or Bob Dole type blow up on national television. Now, again, with Trump, of course, he's blown up 5,000 times and it doesn't matter, but I don't know. Could it?
Yeah. Okay. Just final thoughts on that for me. The one thing, the one small note I would say that augurs in the possibility of this is I wouldn't be the bottom could just fall out of DeSantis. And you remember this with Marco Rubio before the Christie, vivisection of him at that debate. I didn't look this up beforehand, so I'm going from memory. But I think that debate was 5 nights before the primary, maybe
Saturday. I think it was just Saturday night before. I think
before Tuesday. Yeah, I was thinking maybe it was the weekends, but it was very, very close.
Right.
Our internals, the Jeb Bush internals, that night before that debate had Marco closing on Trump in second, and then Tuesday, 3 nights later, he ends up at like 7%. He ends up in 5th or 6th. So like that happens in these things when you have people that are strategic voters, right? And if you're looking at DeSantis, I mean, his super PAC chief has quit. He looks sad. It kind of looks like a Casey campaign. We're seeing these videos now. You could see both people that are Trump's second choice and Haley's second choice, both kind of saying in Iowa, like, well, I want my vote to count and I'm going to dump him. Like, it just doesn't seem like it's going to happen, especially if that Seltzer poll comes in. So you could see, I don't think it's crazy to think that DeSantis could fall to 7% and have those votes accrue to Nikki and Trump and maybe that changes the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, maybe if you're still for DeSantis at this point, you're a little more. I know everyone says, well, DeSantis voters are closer to Trump voters, but I don't. At this point, I think if you're hanging in there, who knows what you see in DeSantis, and maybe what you don't want is Trump. I mean, I do wonder how much of all the other vote is now a non-Trump. In Iowa, Trump lost last time in 2016, partly I think because the conventional view was he didn't debate in the Iowa debate, which was then the Des Moines Register debate, right before the caucus. There is supposed to be a debate. I think CNN's hosting it, though not the Des Moines Register, maybe with the DMR, I don't know, which I think is now scheduled for January 10th. I mean, Trump presumably won't show up, as he hasn't. I don't know. Could they all just get on stage and just say over and over, this is disrespectful of the voters of Iowa. You guys are the first state. You've always played such a big role. He's refusing to show up. And then there's supposed to be a New Hampshire debate, same sort of thing. And they are kind of insane in Iowa and New Hampshire in terms of normally there's the high information voters and the medium and the low. Like everyone in Iowa and New Hampshire is a high information voter. They love being that. Not everyone, but they love that in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks before the caucus and the primary. So that all of that makes it slightly more likely that things move a little more than in a normal primary where, what you see 2 weeks out is usually what you get, right?
Yeah. My final caveat of that is some of these high info voters in the Republican primary in Iowa are so high info that they're not even watching those debates because they're so in with Trump. Like at that TPUSA event that we talked about last Tuesday, which you should go to watch last week's ep if you haven't to get a full rundown of the crazy that I saw. Like there wasn't even a primary happening there. And talk about high info voters. And these are people that flew to Phoenix to go to a rally, right? So again, that's a self-selected group, but that's the thing Trump has going for him. There's a certain group out there that has decided the primary is over for them, and everybody else is kind of fighting over scraps. Okay. Yeah, pretty big group. All right, let's look back. 2023, we're here. We're doing this Christmas week, and we promised people a naughty list and a nice list. What are your takeaways? From the year, looking back now at maybe a 30,000 foot level.
Yeah, I would just say I was at a little dinner last night, and Christmas for Jews here in Washington. Make ourselves feel better.
Chinese
being neglected by the culture as a whole, and Indian food actually. So, but someone we had champagne at the beginning, and someone raised a glass, and she said, "Let's hope 2024 is a better year than 2023." Which is a little unusual, actually, I'd say, in this circumstance, festive circumstance. But everyone said, absolutely, God, I hope so. And it made me think, well, was it really that bad a year? And of course, everyone's personal circumstances differ, and the country's, prosperous, and JVL had a very good news piece on this. It's up to the
maybe
board.
A higher, concern about also Israel, Gaza there is maybe
but I mean,
thinking that too.
It is true that if you had said a year ago to us, to me, what would I hope happens in 2023? I said I would hope that Trump gets increasingly discredited and becomes increasingly unlikely to be the Republican nominee or the next president domestically. And abroad, this is pre-Hamas and Israel, obviously. Abroad, I hope that Putin is on a path to losing in Ukraine. I think those are the two most important things that could happen for liberal democracy and decent politics in the world. And neither really has happened. And that's depressing.
That's true. I'll be the nice list though. I'll be the cheery one. I mean, like the economic rebound this year has been better than anybody could have possibly predicted. And this is not to relitigate the debate about whether people's economic problems are real or whether their concerns or their annoyances about the grocery store. Like all of that is legitimate. That said, what is unimpeachable and undebatable is that basically every expert said that we were headed to a recession. Like there's not a lot of precedent for us to tame inflation, whatever word you want to use, without going into a recession. Having a recessionary environment. My father is pretty non-political, is in finance world, and every time I went home over the past year, I kept saying, and he's one of these optimistic types, not a great Bulwark fit, but every time I went home, I was like, it doesn't seem as bad as everybody's saying. And like, what do you, and he kept saying that. He's like, all the economists that come brief us, so this is non-political. This is not the CNBC economists, like the economists that brief finance, mutual fund managers, right? They all kept saying it's coming around the bend. Like a recession's going to happen. You got to prepare. And he kept being like, I don't know. Like maybe that'll happen, but things seem better. And that optimistic view on the economy ended up being right. Like at least, regardless of what, the particulars on what you mean about that. Like we did not have a recession. Who knows what could happen in 2024? Anything. So there could be some other shock that causes some recession. But if the indicators keep going this way, and we discussed this with Noah Smith, there's this delayed kind of sense of gratification. People's 401ks are going back up. Maybe in some ways there was something that happened that harmed the chance of Donald Trump winning again in 2023. It's just people hadn't noticed it really yet during the year. No, so that's a positive spin.
That's very real. And I've slightly think that the scenario where there's delayed reaction to a lessening of inflation and a good economy kicks in the first or second quarter of 2024 and does show up a little bit in polls, and then obviously on election day, I think I'm a little more open to that possibility maybe than I was 3 or 4 months ago. And it is astonishing that he gets of course, the Biden gets no credit for any of this as of now still, but maybe that does change and it's delayed.
The other positive, and this is a political show, we had some actual elections this year.
Right.
And once again, with the exception of literally my state that I'm in right now, Louisiana, which I don't think there should be a ton of hope for anti-Trump candidates here. The candidates that ran on the most extreme MAGA platforms did poorly overall. The types of center-left Democrats that appeal to us, Andy Beshear in Kentucky, did well in states outside of, what was expected, a continued trend from 2022. And, we talked about this a little bit on the next level, but I think that another thing that people are slow to recognize is that, all this tumult in our political system, all this turmoil has meant that certain, that the literal humans who make up the parties have changed, right? And the types of humans that are now in the Democratic coalition, or even the pro-democracy coalition, if you want to call it such, are the types of voters that vote, and that show up. And there was a period in 2016 and even 2018 where the Republicans were out doing polls because they weren't catching some of the voters, and it's happened. That has flipped, right? And I think partially because of the turnout gap, and Republicans have added a lot of people into their coalition that aren't as reliable voters. So we'll see how that turns out in 2024. But I think that's something that really, has become clear in the last 12 months. That is a structural benefit. We talk a lot of times about the structural disadvantages that the coalition has based on the electoral college and certain things, but that's been a real structural advantage that's appeared kind of in the last. I guess it was clear in 2020, but it was hard to sort of see through the rubble a little bit. But I think it's really clear now.
Well, another way of putting it is, I think that's a really good point. Another way of putting it is that Trump did turn out those voters in 2020, the low propensity voters, and they made it reasonably close. Everyone's assuming, and I have too, that he probably will turn them out again in 2024. It's probably the safer assumption. But he will. I mean, all these indictments, the Colorado stuff. I mean,
Right.
you do wonder if all of that sort of a few of them decide, I don't know, maybe not, and that yes, all it takes is a few percent of those people not to show up, and the balance of power in Wisconsin, Michigan, et cetera, changes pretty radically.
All right. Well, I've got not my party this week. I've got coming out on my winners and losers of 2023. So I will not give them all away here. But I do have to give one shout out to my number one winner of 2023, John Fetterman, who just kept on dropping W's. He's getting protested over Israel, standing against the terrorists. He's going after Bob Menendez. He's wearing shorts to the Capitol. And this week we a bunch of pardons. Joe Biden had been really reluctant on this. I think this might have been, and I think it was kind of unfortunate they put it out Christmas week. So I just wanted to mention it. Friday before Christmas, people that had been convicted of marijuana crimes, not like heavy drug dealers, but like small amounts of marijuana, a mass pardon, smart and long overdue, given that marijuana is legal in like half the country now. And John Fetterman was pushing for that. So who would have thought? Maybe we'll have some pleasant surprises in 2024 as well. Any final thoughts, Bill, before we let people go?
Oh, I think there'll be surprises of all sorts, and why shouldn't some of them be pleasant? That's about as upbeat. That's about as upbeat as I'm getting,
All right. Well, a Merry Christmas to all who celebrate. And thank you guys for hanging out with us here at the Bulwark. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube feed. If you haven't, send this to your friends. If they're looking for some uplift, it's our most uplifting episode ever of Ballot Box with Bill and Tim. We'll be back next Tuesday. We'll be back to doing it live here on the YouTube feed. We'll catch you all soon. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.